There's a debate among freelancers on whether you should charge an hourly rate or a fixed price for projects you find on Upwork. Well, in this episode, today's guest and I debate this topic. Ryan Clark is known as Mr. SharePoint, with more than 2 million earned on Upwork. He is also a contributor to the Upwork blog, where he shares his insights and tips for other freelancers. In this interview, we discuss how Ryan grew his freelancing business and his rationale for charging clients an hourly rate, even for something as complicated to configure and install as SharePoint. So if you're struggling on whether you should be charging hourly or a fixed price, you're going to love this episode. So let's talk to Mr. SharePoint himself, Ryan Clark. Ryan, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Sean, thank you for having me.
So I ran into you. You are a very, very busy person, especially on Upwork, because I first came to my attention actually, because I saw that you were posting about what you had done on SharePoint and how successful you had been by focusing on this one very kind of unique niche. And so when I saw your success, I was like, I've got to have this person on the show. So for our audience, can you just tell them what you actually do and what your handle is?
Yeah, so I'm a modern workplace architect. I primarily focus on Microsoft technologies. My business name, or what I go by, is Mr. SharePoint. So I've kind of coined that term. And yeah, that's what I go by. People don't even really call me Ryan anymore. They literally call me Mr. SharePoint.
Well, I love it. You know, if you're going to brand yourself, boy, that's a great way to brand yourself in the Microsoft ecosystem, Mr. SharePoint.
You're not lying.
Not the SharePoint guru,
Right, exactly.
I love it. So, let's kind of go through this because you've done extremely well on Upwork. And, we've had Courtney Allen on the show before, and she, of course, much like you, focused on a very specific niche in the Microsoft ecosystem. But let's talk about the early days, because I think, so many people, when they start first getting into freelancing, they kind of struggle and they may have certain sets of skills, but they don't know which one's going to catch. So let's take us back to when you first started getting on Upwork, when you first started looking at this as a freelance marketplace. What was it kind of like for you?
I mean, at the time, it wasn't really Upwork when I first started using it. It was Odesk or Elance or something like that. But ultimately, it became Upwork. But really, I had a skill set right out of college, right out of undergraduate school. I started focusing on SharePoint, kind of got thrown into it with my first job. Real quick story, just so you'll know. Basically, I went to school for engineering and then accounting. So I have both a business and technical background. First job that I ever had, the CEO of the company flew out to speak to me at my school, which was very interesting. Never had that happen before. And basically, I told them, I said, look, I like technology. I like the business side of things, but I want to be put somewhere right in the middle. And basically they're like, well, we don't have anything for you right now, but we'll go back and think on it. Flew back home on their jet, maybe a week or so later, called me and said, you know what, we've got this platform called SharePoint. Would you be willing to learn it? And I knew nothing about SharePoint at all. But I said, you know what, in my mind, I'm like, do I want to be one of many in an organization or one of a few or just one of one? And at that time, I wanted to be one of few or one of one. I knew that if no one else was doing that at the company, I'd have a little bit more flexibility. I'd be able to learn a lot, and it kind of took off from there.
And job security.
Absolutely. 100%.
So you started learning SharePoint, working for someone else, and you got obviously good enough that you thought you could do it as a sideline gig. So did you start as a sideline gig, or did you just go right into freelancing right away?
So maybe a few companies later that I worked for, I just, got onto Upwork or Odesk at the time, and then started putting some feelers out there to see if there was any opportunities for project work, and there was. So I started getting booked for projects, and good thing I did that, because at that time, I actually got laid off from my job at the time. I was a sales engineer back there working on a SharePoint product at the time, got laid off. And then I didn't like that feeling. And I said, you know what, I'm never going to let another company have that type of control over me again. And so that's when I said, you know what, let me focus on freelancing. And then I was able to build out a more wider business at that time.
So you were employed doing a little sideline things, but then you got unemployed, and then you were like, okay, my sideline thing better pick up the rest. So how was it in the very beginning? I mean, yes, SharePoint is very unique. But to be fair, there's lots of people that think they know SharePoint. How did you deal with those early days when it was Odesk and then eventually Upwork? What was it that, was there a certain type of business? Were you niching down to a category, or were you just taking anything and everything that had to do with SharePoint?
I mean, I've been very specific on the projects and the clients that I work with. So as long as I felt like the opportunity was something that fit well into my wheelhouse, then I'd consider it. But at the time, like I always believe that people tend to buy things or services from people that they like. So
Mhm.
I believe I had that likability factor. So for me to, get clients was not a hard thing at all. It got to a point where I had too many clients. I had to actually hire people to actually help me do the work behind the scenes as well.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a great point, by the way. I think too many technical freelancers don't always feel comfortable getting on a call with a client or talking to a client. And I think that's a
Agreed.
huge mistake because if you build that rapport, they're going
Hmm.
to trust you. And most of this always comes down to trust. And you trust the people that you know and that you like.
Absolutely.
And the beauty is you don't have to be a salesperson. You don't have to be like, hey, let me sell you on this car. You
Right.
literally just have to listen to what the client is saying and actively listen so you can have an appropriate response and say, here's how I can
Exactly.
help you. I mean, was
Exactly.
that kind of the way that you did it?
Yeah, I mean, I really never had to pitch myself, honestly. And I like to say this about myself and other freelancers: like our work, our recommendations, our reviews, they speak for themselves, right? So, like, if you have those types of reviews where you're highly ranked and you've got great reviews where people are saying fantastic things about you, a potential client or a potential prospect or a client doesn't need to vet you as much, I believe, because you've got that history. So
Yeah.
like now when I like interview and talk with people, like either they already know who I am or they've read all the reviews that I have. And I got to say, and it's very hard these days, I'd say, and Upwork's making it harder, to have like a perfect, job success score,
Right.
which I have right now and I've maintained for a while. But like, that's like my bread and butter. Because if that was to drop, I mean, then people question and be like, well, why did you have a bad situation here? Or why is your job score not perfect? I've had those conversations before. So I focus extremely hard on maintaining that 100% job success score.
And how do you do that? Over deliver? I mean, under promise, over deliver.
Oh, always under promise and over deliver. But again, I choose exactly who I want to work with because
Yeah.
I do believe that in some instances, I've had situations in the past where people have tried to like jeopardize my job success score. And it made me really think like, man, like sometimes you don't necessarily know who you're working with until you maybe get on a video call or do some more due diligence. Whereas in my earlier days, I didn't really do as much. I do a bunch of them now. So I'm
Yeah.
checking
Let's
to see
talk
who the
about that
client
because
is and
I think too many especially freelancers just starting out on the
mhm,
platform, they're like so desperate to take anything and they don't realize the ramifications of taking anything that comes your way.
right.
What do you kind of look for? Because I think I believe that as a freelancer and a client relationship, we have kind of a mutual say in what's going on. Just because you may be
Right.
paying me, you're paying me for my expertise. So how do you kind of screen clients? What's kind of your thinking process? Because you're right. And it's actually worse for you, Ryan. And I'll tell you why, because you are now at such a high level that if you see one ding, they'll be like, what has suddenly
Exactly.
happened? Right. So
Exactly.
how do you go through that screening process?
So really in the, obviously you send a proposal or maybe you get invited to submit a proposal. But during those initial conversations, I'm asking pertinent questions that are important to me. Tell me more about your organization. Tell me about your goals. Tell me about, what you're trying to really do with this project. And then tell me about yourself. And then I'll go behind the scenes and do, research. Obviously, I want to see if these people are on LinkedIn and other types of social media networks because I do my due diligence. And if I get a good feel and I'm like, okay, I think this is a legitimate project, obviously we all always hope that it will be. Sometimes you do get fraudulent projects. So I
Yeah.
try to stray away from those. But as long as I got a really good feel for things and I feel like the person's genuine, I'll consider it. But it doesn't mean I'm immediately accepting a job. I used to do that back in the day, but like I'll wait a little bit until I feel comfortable because like right now, and I know you know this, but Upwork is removing the ability for if you have what is it, top rated status, you won't be able to, remove feedbacks and things like that. That is a total game changer. So that means all feedbacks on the platform, literally you can't remove them unless you're being belittled or, threatened in some kind of way where Upwork may take it down. But it's like, that just makes me very cautious with regards to who I work with
Yeah.
because I don't want to jeopardize my job success score or anything that's on my profile at all.
I want to dig into this because this is one of the techniques we actually recommend in our proposal strategies with our tool is the fact
Mhm.
you should ask questions. And because I think that always it's one, it shows the client that you read what they provided. Secondly, that you're genuinely interested, hence
Mhm.
asking questions. And third, their response to their questions are going to give you more information about what state that they're in. Because even
Right.
if they are a great potential client, the project may not be ready to go. I'm sure you've run
Exactly.
into instances like that where and then when push comes to shove to say, yeah, let's sign an agreement, let's get going. It's like, well, wait a minute, it got deprioritized, right?
Right.
And so I
Exactly.
think it is so important what you shared is this relationship is built on mutual trust. And to build that, we've got to have a dialogue. We have to have communication, and we need to be doing our homework on each other.
Right.
My stats as a freelancer are totally out there for you to see. I don't get to see that much about you as a client, but I think it's great that you say LinkedIn. I mean, to me, the moment I get somebody's name, I'm looking them up on LinkedIn because you see the name in the chat window. I'm going to look them up, not to necessarily contact them off platform. I want to know who these people are. What is their background? I mean,
exactly.
And I wish in some ways Upwork provided more detail on that beyond the previous jobs that they provide, that they had put on platform. Because if you suddenly find a big, insurance company needing SharePoint, that's going to change the way that you're looking at talking to that client versus, hey, I'm Bob's Auto Shop and I heard I have to have SharePoint on there.
Exactly. So, I mean, just being very cautious and actually just, being a human, right? Like everything doesn't always have to just be transactional. So I build relationships. And again, like I said, I've learned that people tend to buy things from people that they like. So if you have one client, you've done a really great job, you've overperformed, over delivered and all of that type of stuff, I think that they'd be more likely to hire you again. And that's why I have a lot of repeat clients. I've had clients on the platform for 4 or 5 plus years now, consistent business. So,
let's go through this a little bit because there's 2 angles I want to touch on. Because SharePoint, there's a lot of projects out there or jobs out there that are kind of, just very simple. It's, design this flyer. I'll use that. I need a flyer to hand out. Go design this. And that's usually not that complex. SharePoint, however, being in the technical skills, SharePoint can be and is complex.
Right.
How do you manage complex projects on the platform, knowing that if you screw up, it could lead to a potential bad review? Because that's, I think, a lot of developers. So in our background as mobile app developers, mobile app development, much like SharePoint, it's very complex, lots of moving pieces and parts. So how do you manage that project management on the big project like in configuring SharePoint up?
Yeah, in my world, it's kind of like train the trainer, and always kind of in the realms of, I don't always take on a project and then, work on the project. And then at the end, I deliver it and I show it to you. I'm showing you stuff every step of the way. So with that, in that regard, it basically means that the client shouldn't have any surprises. So if you show them something earlier on and like, I don't feel like that's going in the right direction, let's change it earlier on, as opposed to doing it later on where you're like, well, we've already overexhausted our budget. I don't like the way this went. I'm closing the project down. Here's a negative review. I don't have those situations because every step of the way, we have milestones that we're hitting. I'm showing you what's happening. And again, if you don't like it, we'll modify it and make it right. And that's how I've been able to, kind of not have that issue where somebody's unhappy and then we're getting negative reviews. I try to avoid that at all costs.
So it's that constant communication. It's almost like you're getting and communicating with clients pretty aggressively throughout the process.
Absolutely. And, at the end of the day, some of these clients have also become friends. Right. So it's like, they're not just, like I said, I'm not just seeing them as being transactional. There's somebody that, if I actually needed something or maybe had a question or needed a favor, we built that type of rapport.
Got it. So let's talk about when you're getting into these projects and you're getting towards, how do you get the clients to give you these 5-star reviews, right? Because I think, especially for new people out on the platform or even experienced people, what is it that, you've completed the job, you've been communicating, you built the rapport up, you built the trust up, and hopefully a positive relationship, but you still have to close off the project sometime.
Right.
Yeah. Have you ever had a client not want to close off a project, just keep it in perpetuity? I mean, talk to us a little bit about the end of the scope.
Yeah, we'll talk about that latter point in a minute. But basically, when I'm done with the work, and again, I've been sharing updates throughout the project process, right? So at the end, it's very easy to say, well, hey, we're at the end of the project. Seems like things are where we need them to be. Is there anything else you need or anything else I can help you with? That's what I always ask, because you always want to upsell. I wouldn't do that on a fixed project, but most of my projects I take on are hourly on purpose. So I'll upsell. But then also, if there's no other work that needs to be done, I'm like, okay, well, great. I think it's a great time for us to close the project. If you don't need anything else from me, I'd appreciate any type of review that you can give me. I appreciate all honesty. And that's what I say, because then they're like, well, he didn't ask me for a positive review. He just asked for an honest review. And because I've done that, historically, what I've seen is that they'll be like, well, let me think back about what happened. He seemed great. We had a great outcome. And that's what they type and talk about inside of their reviews.
All right. You mentioned something that is a hot can of controversy right now, which is hourly versus fixed. Okay. I want, because I've had this debate, and I think there's arguments for both sides of the equation. You said you preferred hourly, not fixed. Now,
Correct.
I'm going to be arguing against this so that we
Okay.
can have an interesting conversation for the audience.
Let's do it.
I am a client. I have a budget. I have a result that I want to achieve for that budget.
Okay.
I don't care if it takes you 1 hour or 50 hours. I want the result. Hence, I will pay you a fixed price fee so that you have every incentive to get me exactly what I want when I want it for the price that I'm willing to pay for it. That's why I would argue for a fixed price project. Your response?
My response is what I would choose to do instead is offer an alternative. We call it fixed hourly, right? If you're willing to offer, $500 or $1,000 for the project, take my hourly rate. Let's split that, right? Or divide it. And so therefore I'm like, well, let's do a not to exceed from an hourly perspective. And that's how I work around that.
Oh, now we're going to dig into this. This is a gold mine, I think. So instead of doing a fixed price project, you do fixed hourly. Like, I will not exceed X number of hours without your permission, without us agreeing to it ahead of time.
Correct. Absolutely.
And how do the clients respond to that?
I mean, sometimes at least where I'm at in my career, they don't question it, because either when they set up like the project, they're thinking like, oh, well, I'm protecting myself because, I've got a fixed hourly project, which makes sense. But if you look at my track record, 95% of the projects that I work on are hourly on purpose, and I have all this great feedback. And so that alone, helps convince them to say, well, I see what he's saying. As long as we stay under a certain dollar amount, why do I care if it's fixed or hourly? Obviously, it's better for me as a freelancer, but that's how I'm able to convince my clients at the time to do that.
Have you ever had these situations where you had to exceed the hours that it was estimated through?
Absolutely, but that's a cost that I'll eat.
Ah, interesting. Have you ever had an opportunity to go back to a client and say you've changed the scope, and hence we need to add more hours on?
Yes, if it's scope creep, that's different. But if it's something that I underestimated on my behalf, then I'll eat that cost.
Got it. But as far as scope creep, and let's talk about scope creep for a second, because again, I don't think people who are not in the technical space understand that it is so easy for us to get scope creep. Okay. Now, yes, scope creep happens in every profession, but in technology, it's different, because usually scope creep is not a linear increase, it's an exponential increase. Right. So when you start adding and adding and adding, it's not a linear, it's all multiplication.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that, because how do you manage that scope creep? Yeah. Hey, Ryan, I know you finished that. Do you mind just adding this one thing to it? That's usually how it starts, right?
Right. Now,
how do you handle that?
I'm pretty careful with that, because if it's something minor that doesn't take much time, sure, I'll just do it just because I enjoy building the relationship, right? With the hopes that maybe in the near future, if not immediately, there'll be more work. But if it's significant scope creep, where it's taking hours of time, I'll be like, look, this is out of scope. We need to have a change order or an additional set of hours put in for this. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense for me to handle it. But again, that's why I am very candid and upfront with any of my clients that I work with. There should be no misunderstandings. And I try to limit that.
So Ryan, that's actually very fascinating to me just in general, because I do think the people who struggle with this concept of hourly versus fixed, I think there's a happy medium ground. I know why clients argue for it. I definitely know why freelancers may prefer hourly, because it will basically make sure that they're getting paid for their time, Right. And I think it's a good idea. It's a balance, but also, there is a argument to be made on fixed price where you have done this in the past, especially if you're productizing a service. And this is where I would probably come back as saying that the best time to do fixed pricing is I have a service that 90% of which is the same thing I've done before. It's that 10% in the edges that I'll have to adapt for the client. Hence, right. I can fix price because I'm 90% certain of what I have to do. I think where fixed price comes into really problematic is when you don't have a productized service where there are so many unknown variables and you're just like, well, the client only has X amount. I need the money right now. Let me do it. And you haven't truly understood what the nuances are going to be. So I think you have to treat fixed price very carefully where you are really, really, really confident. And I think you can justify hourly based on your reputation. And I also think you can justify hourly as a new person if you show demonstrable expertise. Yeah, I'm new to Upwork, but let me tell you of the things that I've done that related to exactly what you need done. That confidence comes across because
Absolutely.
remember, clients just want what they want what they're paying for, but they
Right.
want the result. They don't necessarily care how the result is achieved.
Exactly. And again, I look at from a historical reference. If you look at my profile, for example, majority of it's hourly. So I don't really have an issue with clients refuting that. And if they do refute it that much, I just won't work with them.
Yeah.
It's really that simple for me.
Do you ever get concerned that if especially in the beginning, that if you turn down a project, you'll never get any? I mean, there is a little bit of apprehension and fear that every freelancer experience that, if I don't do this work now, will there be another job down the line? How did you kind of overcome that?
I mean, I've always done research on, what's the frequency of the types of jobs that I want posted on Upwork? What's the frequency of them? Is it one a month? Is it one a day? So let's say if it's one a day, for example, obviously I think currently it's more than that, but if it's one a day, for example, let's say I forego a project that I may have been able to get today. Historically, I know because it's at least one a day, there'll be another one tomorrow and then the next day. And so when I think from that perspective, you got to not think short term, you should be thinking long term. And obviously not every project's going to be good for you. And I've developed a strategy that has worked very well for me, but again, it's not going to be for everyone. And I completely understand that.
So just to kind of recap it, what because you've been on the system for so long, kind of the frequency of SharePoint projects that are coming out. So
Right.
Because you understand that there will always be more SharePoint projects, you'll know that if I turn this one down or if I take this one, I'll have to wait X amount of time before the next one that comes up that kind of meets the criteria that we have. And I think that's a really, really good point. And I think too many freelancers, especially early on, don't realize the volume of work that's coming through Upwork. I mean, it is significant. And I'm going to be fair. SharePoint is a niche product, but most projects are niche, right? I mean, so even a niche project that requires SharePoint, there's going to be a frequency by which it comes on. So if you turn one down, don't worry, just wait a little longer. So
exactly.
I'm just curious, because of your status, how much of your work is people inviting you to a project versus you going out and hunting for projects?
It's usually like half and half. I mean, I don't really hunt for many projects anymore. I mean, I'm already pretty much at capacity, but if I see something that's interesting, then yes. But I mean, it's really like, 'cause the other thing with freelancing that I'd like to make clear that I had as a problem earlier on is this idea or concept around feast or famine. Right? Where you may have really, really, really good months or really, really good days, but then you may have really, really bad months, really bad days where you're not generating anything. And I know that I've seen this happen to other freelancers. They just get discouraged. They're like, I don't want to do this anymore. So they just kind of quit, cold turkey. But my thing is like what I've been able to build is a consistent revenue base. So I never have to have the feast or famine happen. That's why I prefer hourly in some instances, because if it's work that a client needs that's just not a one-off, I would prefer to have retained work. And that's really where my focus is.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you appreciated early on is that you were steadying your stream, right?
Right.
Because I think that too many times you get the big project, yay, I don't have to go look for work anymore.
Right.
And we all know that is not the case. And so you really kind of have that balance between now I have the luxury of being more selective in what I'm looking for, but I'm still looking.
Exactly.
That is the one thing. No matter how busy you are, you still have to be looking, because all those projects will end. And the clients that you hope to retain for future, their circumstances may change as well. So having that balance between the retained, between the ongoing looking, and then finding that kind of one-off project that was like, wait a minute, this is interesting to me. Let me pursue it. Being open to those opportunities. But I loved how you point out that feast and famine, because you are correct. So many freelancers just get discouraged. Well, there's no jobs on Upwork for SharePoint. Forget that. No. And you're like,
exactly.
No, that ain't the case, buddy.
That's not the case at all.
Trust me, Mr. SharePoint will tell you.
Exactly. But I'd also say again that, you should all, because when I first started, I necessarily didn't take projects that I wanted. I took projects for the opportunity.
Right.
So I was charging less, doing projects that I probably wouldn't necessarily be doing now. But because of the track record, I don't have to deal with that anymore. And the interesting thing is with Upwork, you're dealing with people that are all across the world, that are varying hourly rates or varying fixed project rates, whatever it is that they're charging. Like, I know everybody doesn't charge what I charge, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, it's also about value proposition. What are you offering and how can you justify what you're charging? And that's what I've become really good at.
Yeah, I think it is funny that you mentioned that you undercharged. Everybody makes the same mistake. Everybody undercharges, but you do that to build the reputation.
Right.
That's the price of admittance. And then you start charging a premium. And I think this is
Exactly.
the other thing that always strikes me is that, you can charge a premium not only because of your expertise and your reputation, but because you want to charge a premium. In other
Right.
words, and people are attracted to a premium price. I think that's the one concept that especially people overseas don't understand all the time is that it's not a race to the bottom. Okay. It's not who is the guy that can do SharePoint for $5 an hour.
Right.
That is not what clients want to buy. It is, trust me, if you want somebody who wants to pay you $5 an hour for SharePoint stuff, that's not a client you want to work with ever.
Exactly. My point exactly. Right. So there's somebody out there for everyone when it comes to client and freelancer relationships. And honestly, like there's millions of freelancers on the platform, right? There's a reason why all these people are coming to the platform to find work. Now, not everyone's going to find work, and that's an understood thing, but those that do, and granted, I think it's harder to find work now than it was maybe 6 years ago. I think just by pure volume of people that are there, like you've got more people applying to jobs, and it makes it less, I think, frequent that a client may see your proposal unless you have a unique value proposition. You know what I mean? And so at the end of the day, what is your unique value proposition? Why are you charging what you're charging? And how can you replicate what you're doing? I believe if you sell one thing, you can sell a million of them. Now,
Yeah.
convert that to hours. Think about it that way. If you can bill somebody for 1 hour for something that you're good at, could you bill them for another 100?
Yeah.
Or another 1,000? You know what I mean? That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I hear you, brother. I completely agree with you, and I think the proof is in the success that you've seen. So I mean, and
Exactly.
again, the luxury I've had in talking to successful freelancers like yourself is that everyone shares the same story. You started out smaller than you probably should, but you're building your reputation. You build systems and processes. You're always on the look, even though you may have retained clients that are coming in. You're to get away from the feast and famine, and then you're always looking at your rates, positioning yourself as premium, because
Right.
the clients that want to pay for premium are the clients you actually want to work with.
Exactly.
I mean, because they value you, they see the worth in you, and that is a great
Yep.
relationship to have. Where if someone's like, you know what, Ryan, you are worth every penny I pay for you. That not only makes you feel good, but it also makes you feel like, hey, I've got someone who I can build a relationship with towards the future. And if they don't give me more work, they probably will refer me, so I get more work from there.
Exactly. And referrals, I think, are one of the best ways and cheapest ways to get business, right? That's why I always say, put your best foot forward and do great work. Because again, your work speaks for itself. And if somebody's really happy with what you did, why would they not recommend you?
Yeah.
And on top of that, another, not to change, a brief aside is that not only am I close to the clients that I work with, but I'm also close to a bunch of people on the Upwork side as well. Right. So I built relationships. I mean, Hayden Brown, CEO of Upwork, even mentioned me in a recent annual report that they had. You know what I mean? So literally. So it's like, obviously I've gained attention not only from an Upwork corporate perspective and then, outside of that as well. But again, I think it's important to be likable, but you should be able to build relationships with everybody that you think you should. So why would
Yes.
I not build relationships with people at Upwork corporate? I think I totally
Absolutely.
should.
And Upwork actually hires freelancers on the platform to do work for them.
Absolutely. Yes, they do. They absolutely do.
So I want to end with one thing because this brings up a slightly divergent topic. Have you done enterprise client work?
Yes.
Okay. So you're part of the talent cloud that
That's
they come
correct,
up
yes.
with. Can you talk a little bit about this? Because this is one of those things that you don't hear a lot about online. And there is, and so let's to back up a little bit. For those that are listening, not familiar, Upwork has a sales team that works with big corporations to help them get talent on a short-term basis for projects they may have working. They have what are called these private talent clouds where freelancers are invited into this fairly exclusive community to engage with it. So talk to us about what that's like working in those enterprise clouds.
Yeah, so typically I get approached with those one of two ways. Is either an enterprise client put a project out that I bid on, and then we discuss, and then I end up winning the project, or somebody on the Upwork sales team reaches out and says, hey, I found this project. It's from an enterprise client. You can go ahead and bid on it if you so choose. And then again, if I win the project, you're now in a new enterprise talent cloud with that particular client. And those are great because those clients tend to have great budgets. They tend to be bigger clients. And they tend to also offer repeat work. And so I've had a bunch of those scenarios with projects that have lasted almost a year in some instances of full-time work.
Yeah, I know that 𝗦𝗨𝗠𝗠𝗔𝗪𝗦 is, if you look at her profile, she's got tons of talent clouds out there. And what's nice is that, and I love the fact that you mentioned how you got there. If you are in Upwork Search, you can literally put in enterprise client, because they actually have a badge that it shows up on jobs that are for enterprise clients. And even when Upwork is posting on the platform, they use the word enterprise client. That's actually a search term that you can have a flag for in your saved searches. So when those opportunities come up, those are ones to pay attention to. And you'll see a unique little badge on them. There's not often, because they do have an internal team that's reaching out to people like Ryan. But every once in a while, you'll start to see these jobs that says, we have an enterprise client that needs X. And those opportunities you should absolutely jump on, because as you point out, you get into them, they can be very lucrative and long-term.
Absolutely.
Well,
and they're not really upset about me wanting to charge hourly either. So let me just put that out there.
Well, Ryan, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to share your experience with us. It means so much. And if anyone needs help with SharePoint,
right?
How can they find Mr. SharePoint?
Honestly, you just go to mrsharepoint.com.
Wow, you make it so easy. That's a good domain name. I wonder how you got it. Wink, wink. We talked about it earlier.
We did.
Ryan, thank you so much for your time, man. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the video. And if you're not already subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel here. More importantly, if you found it useful, please share it with your friends. And one more thing, if you're looking for some great tools to help you succeed on Upwork, go check out 𝗬𝗪𝗠𝗪𝗦. We think you'll like it.